Nowadays, it seems nearly everyone in America is wearing clothing that has some designer name brand on it. Levi's, Wrangler, Lee Jeans, Carhartt, and the list goes on and on. Now, a lot of folks don't know it, but there was a time that many Americans made their clothing from leftover flour sacks and feed bags. That's right. Nearly all women and children wore clothing that was handmade out of necessity. This trend hit its peak during the Great Depression during the 1930s, and it's estimated that nearly 4 million Americans was wearing dresses and shirts and underwear, socks, and many other clothing that was made from flour sacks. Now, many folks think that this trend started during the Great Depression, but the truth is, it actually started several decades earlier. Indeed, life in rural America meant hard work and frugal habits. Farm families were used to making do with what they had, and they wasted nothing that could be recycled or reused. With feed sacks and flour bags, farm women took thriftiness to new heights of creativity, transforming these humble bags into dresses and underwears and towels and curtains and quilts and any other household necessity. So, when and how did all this begin, and what's the history behind this movement? Well, my friends, I'm happy you asked, and I'm happy to tell you the complete story. So with that, this is the true story of the flour sack clothing movement in rural Appalachia. Our story begins over 200 years ago. Now, you have to keep in mind that during the early 1800s, food staples such as grain and seed and animal feed were packaged for transportation and storage in tins and boxes and wooden barrels. And bulk farm and food products were shipped exclusively in barrels. Now, this wasn't the most ideal method of storage since the tin would rust and the handmade boxes and barrels would leak and they were easily damaged. To make matters worse, they were bulky and heavy and difficult to transport. Now, just a few years earlier in 1794, the cotton gin was invented, and this resulted in an explosion of cotton crops being planted in the southern states. So there was plenty of cotton available to use in shipping, but there was one problem. Hand stitching cotton was tedious and it took lots of time, even the stitching for just one bag. This made the material expensive to use for shipping. However, this all changed in 1846 when a revolutionary machine called the stitching machine was invented. You know, it's what we call a sewing machine nowadays. The stitching machine changed the shipping industry in America nearly overnight. The expensive wooden barrels soon gave way to cotton sacks as the preferred method for shipping flour, grain, and seeds and feed. These cotton sacks had many advantages. They could be made quickly, and they were cheap. And they weren't nearly as heavy as the wooden barrels, and they didn't leak. Overall, this reduced the shipping costs and shipping times, and before you knew it, cotton sacks were being used to ship nearly everything. Now, feed sacks were initially made of a heavy canvas, and they were reusable, and the farmer would just bring his empty sack stamped with his mark or brand to the mill to be filled. This changed when the Northeast mills began weaving inexpensive cotton fabric in the late 1800s. These feed bags were initially printed on plain white cloth, and the sizes corresponded to the barrel sizes. For example, one barrel bag would hold 196 pounds of flour, and an eighth of a barrel bag only held 14 pounds. The brand name of the flour was usually just printed on the side of the bag, and many of the logos on these flour sacks were circular, and it was a legacy from the time when these logos had to fit on the top of the wooden barrel. Now, Appalachians never wasted anything that could be reused or repurposed. And as a result, women quickly discovered that these bags could be used for fabric for quilts and other needs. Yes, sir. They began making all their towels, their dish rags, and pillowcases. They were even making dresses and children's clothing too, proudly wearing the company logo that might have been on the flour sack on the clothing. By 1915, the prices of cotton dropped dramatically with the invention of new materials such as rayon. This meant that the flour and feed companies started using suddenly cheaper cotton exclusively for their products. And by 1925, the manufacturers began using different colors in the fabric. By now, nearly every family in Appalachia were dressed in clothing made from these sacks. The Great Depression hit in the 1930s, and war rationing of supplies followed during World War II. During this time, it's estimated that nearly 4 million Americans were wearing flour sack clothing. Heck, even the President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, stepped in to create a law to standardize the sizes of all cotton bags. This helped women know exactly how much reusable fabric each bag contained. By the 1940s, the bag manufacturers were turning out bags in bright colors and printed designs. That's right, they were all competing with each other to turn out the prettiest flour sacks. Each company hired artists to design their products, and the company label was then printed on paper that could easily be removed, therefore yielding more fabric. It was felt that these designs and colors would boost sales, because the woman of the house would always select the brand that had the most attractive fabric. This turned out to be a great marketing ploy, as women picked out flour, sugar, beans, rice, cornmeal, and even the feed and fertilizer for the family farm based on the fabrics they desired. Some sacks displayed lovely border prints for pillowcases. Scenic prints were also popular. Manufacturers even pre-printed patterns for dolls and stuffed animals and quilts. During World War II, there was a shortage of cotton fabric for the civilian population, and the recycling of bags became a necessity and was encouraged by the government. After the war, these bags were not only a sign of domestic thrift, they also gave the rural woman a sense of fashion. National sewing contests were organized as a way for women to show off their skills, and manufacturers to show off their designs. Women frequently would sell their surplus bags to others as a way of picking up extra cash to aid in running the family home. Heck, even fashion magazines and pattern companies began to take notice of the popularity of these cotton sacks. They began to publish patterns to take advantage of these prints. So you see, the cotton and the feed bag clothing era spanned for nearly 200 years, starting in the early 1800s. It speaks volumes about the vital role that Appalachian women played in providing clothing, bedding, linen, and even stuffed toys for their children. Now today, you can find beautiful examples of these dresses that they made in nearly every prestigious museum in America, including the Smithsonian. And that, my friends, is the complete story of the cotton and the feed sack clothing era. Thanks for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, I hope you'll consider subscribing to this channel, where I share all sorts of Appalachian history and storytelling. Till next time, my friends.